Pesahim, Daf Mem Aleph through Mem Zayin. On Daf Mem Aleph, the Gemara discusses cooking b'chamei Tveria, using the hot springs of Tveria. Cooking in the context of Shabbos, where bishul is a melacha daraisa, as well as eating a Korban Pesach that's been cooked. The halacha is a Korban Pesach has to be roasted. If you eat a Korban Pesach that's been improperly cooked instead of roasted, cooked using water, then you're chayav a lav daraisa, you're over a lav daraisa. The Gemara discusses in those two contexts whether cooking b'chamei Tveria is considered mevushal or not. Rav Chisda said, mevashal b'chamei Tveria b'Shabbos pater. You're not chayav on Shabbos for the malacha of bishul, but for Korban Pesach, if you eat it, you are chayav. The Gemara says, why? It should be the same thing. If it's not considered bishul in the context of Shabbos, it shouldn't be considered bishul in the context of Korban Pesach as well. The Gemara says, you're right, that's true. It's not considered mevushal. In either context, you're chayav for the Korban Pesach for a different lav, for the lav of, there's a general lav, a catch-all lav of eating the Korban Pesach that was prepared in any other way than the proper way of tzliesh. But in a chinami, it's not considered mevushal, neither in the context of Shabbos, nor in the context of Korban Pesach. Why is Chamei Tveria not considered mevushal? So Rashi in Shabbos says that the reason why cooking in the Chama itself, the reason why cooking in the sun, and similarly Chamei Tveria, other types of non-fire-based heats, why is that not considered cooking in the context of Shabbos? Because ein derech bishulo b'kach. That's not the normal way of cooking. We find ideas of shinui in Halachos Shabbos in general. This is a type of shinui that applies not just to Shabbos. This applies to Korban Pesach as well. Apparently, according to Rashi, it's not considered derech bishul, and therefore in various contexts in the Torah that are contingent on bishul, this is not derech bishul. So chama and toldos chama and chamei Tveria is not considered bishul, and therefore you're not chayav on Shabbos for it, and you're not chayav the lav of mevushal. It's not considered mevushal in the context of Korban Pesach, although you're chayav possibly for a different lav of the lav of not tzliesh. What does Rashi mean ein derech bishulo b'kach? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that it doesn't mean literally as it sounds that people don't cook using that kind of chama or chamei Tveria. He says it can't mean that because the Gemara has a whole discussion in Shabbos of whether chamei Tveria is actually considered toldos ha'esh or toldos or not toldos ha'esh. How is chamei Tveria heated up? The Gemara has one idea that it's heated up through Gehenim, one idea that it's heated up through the chama, and depending on how it's heated up, the Gemara says what gives it its heat, that would determine whether it's toldos ha'esh, which is chayav on Shabbos, or whether it's not toldos ha'esh, like our Gemara says, the low toldos ha'esh, it's not toldos, it's toldos ha'esh b'inon, and chamei Tveria is not toldos ha'esh. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, whether people do or do not use chamei Tveria to cook is fixed. Either they do or they don't. If they don't, what difference does it make if it's toldos ha'esh? And if they do, what difference does it make if it's not toldos ha'esh? Rav Shlomo Zalman says, you see that when Rashi says it's not derech bishulo b'kach, he's not referring to the actual fact of whether people cook or not. Rashi's telling you it's a halachic category. Anything which is eish or toldos eish is considered derech bishul. Anything which is not considered eish or toldos eish is not considered derech bishul, regardless of whether people do or don't cook using this particular type of heat. Rav Shlomo Zalman therefore argues that when it comes to things like the microwave, when it comes to different types of heating, cooking and heating, which are not considered eish, even if they're very normal, even if they're fully normal ways to cook, they're designed like that, they're manufactured and sold and used like that, it doesn't matter. If it's not considered eish, if we assume that a microwave or some other heating mechanism is not considered eish or toldos eish, you would not be chayav on Shabbos. It would still be usher, but you wouldn't be chayav. Therefore it would be less stringent. And if someone has to cook, if there's a question of chol sheyesh bo sakana and so on, where you have to cook, it would be better to use a microwave because that's not going to be bishul daraisa, because it's like chamei Tveria, it's like chama or chamei Tveria, it's ein derech bishulo b'kach, which again doesn't refer to the actual question of whether people use it to cook. It refers to a halachic categorization of ein derech bishulo b'kach. Other poskim disagree. Other poskim understand that ein derech bishulo b'kach means pshuto k'mashmo. People do not use chamei Tveria to cook. And they say a microwave, insofar as you do use it to cook, then it would be considered derech bishul, and it wouldn't have the leniencies of chamei Tveria. On Daf Mem Beis, the Gemara brings Darash Rava. Rava taught Isha lo salosh b'chama. A woman preparing matzahs, anyone preparing matzahs, I guess it was commonly prepared by women, lo talosh b'chama, should not knead the dough in the sun. Why? Because the sun heats up the dough, and even though matzah is supposed to get hot when it goes into the oven, but if it gets hot before it goes into the oven and it's not as hot as an oven, then it can become chametz. The heat actually has the paradoxical property, it finalizes the matzah, but it also can make it chametz faster. So this is how we paskin. You can't make matzahs outdoors where the sun is there, even indoors, opposite a window you can't make matzah. If there's glass, some achronim are mekel. If the sun doesn't shine directly but through glass, some are mekel. Others say no, that the heat is transmitted through glass. So you shouldn't make the matzahs next to a window, and so on. There is an additional application of this halacha, though, which the Rishonim say, which the Shulchan Aruch brings, which is very practical. You shouldn't knead the dough eitzel hataner, near the oven, because the heat of the oven will cause the matzah to become chametz. What does near the oven mean? So the Mishnah Berurah says it means the mouth of the oven. But on the sides of the oven or behind the oven, there it's not so hot. That's not a problem. The Achronim discussed what about their houses had heating, like our houses have. Instead of the heat being piped in through radiators and steam and various modern techniques, they just had a large furnace, a taner beis hacharif, that would keep the house warm in the winter. So the Achronim warn you that you cannot prepare matzah in the room that has that furnace, certainly not when it's on, even if the furnace has been turned off. But if it was on earlier in the day, there's residual heat that in that room, and you're not allowed to use that room throughout the day. If you want to use it, if you want to use the room that had the taner beis hacharif, you have to open the doors and windows, and then it's a judgment call when you think the heat has dissipated enough to be okay. Even the regular oven, which we said you can't knead at the mouth of the oven, you can knead on the sides. If the oven's been on for a long time, what your kitchen feels like on Erev Shabbos after the oven's been on for a few hours, if the oven's been on for a while, there's enough heat throughout the room that it's also a problem. So again, the Mishnah Berurah says, Hakol lefi ha'inyan, you have to, the size of the room and so on, you have to judge whether the heat that was produced by the oven, whether the room has been heated up to the point that it's no longer safe to make matzahs in such a room. Mishnah Berurah adds an additional chumrah, which he's very concerned about. People are not careful about. He says, people, when they bring the matzahs to the oven, let's say they were kneading the matzahs away from the oven. When they bring it to the oven, they get too close to the oven. So obviously you have to pass near the oven to get into the oven. But if you just pass through quickly without stopping, that's fine. But if you stop and you wait till the oven's ready, and even worse, they start schmoozing, he says, they talk to the other people there, the matzah just sits there near the oven, that's a terrible thing. He says it's an Isser Gomer. Furthermore, the Mishnah Berurah says, the sticks that you use to put the matzah into the oven, you should exchange them periodically. He doesn't say how often, he says kipam b'pam. Those sticks that keep going into the oven, they keep getting warmed up by the oven, those sticks eventually will get warm and hot. And again, you shouldn't have hot sticks coming into contact with the oven, with the matzah, so you should replace those sticks every now and then. Chazon Ish, said you should replace the sticks every single time. You need a lot of sticks for that. Moshe explained, it doesn't mean that a stick for forever, it can never be used again, it has to be thrown away and recycled. It means that for a while at least, while the sticks have picked up heat, you can't use them, so you need to have a rotating supply of sticks. So you shouldn't be putting the matzahs on top of hot sticks. Some places have a disposable paper covering around the sticks. I'm not sure if that's for this purpose of keeping the heat away from the stick itself, just on the paper, which they then take off and replace between each matzah, or just to keep some of the matzah might get stuck to the stick, so they want to just have a paper they can throw away. But this chumrah is brought that you should replace the sticks periodically, according to the Mishnah Berurah, every matzah according to the Chazon Ish. A related chumrah, the Mishnah Berurah is worried that people who bring the matzahs into the oven will dally and tarry outside the oven. So in some bakeries they would put 3 matzahs on a stick, and then they would one problem is that the matzah waits after the dough has been eaten until you get enough matzahs on the stick. But also, if you're getting too many matzahs in and out of the oven, you have to wait till the oven's ready. Then people carrying the matzahs might be hanging out near the oven. So some matzah bakeries actually have swinging doors between the oven room and the other room, so they can keep some of the heat out. They have at least one door closed. They try as much as possible to arrange the operation in such a way that matzahs are not waiting at all, if possible, or as little as possible after they've been rolled out. And B, they certainly shouldn't be waiting in the oven room or near the oven room, because that heat we see can cause the matzah to become chametz faster than we would like. On beginning of the third parak, on Daf Mem Beis, the Mishnah says, "Ve'elu ovrin b'Pesach." We're talking about the prohibition of Bal Yerah, things that you're not even allowed to own and retain in your house over Pesach. And the Mishnah gives examples, Kuta Chabavli, and so on. various examples of taruvas chametz, of mixtures of chametz. On Daf Mem Gimel, the Gemara says, Man tana de chametz dagan gomer de taruvas v'nuksha be'enei belav. There are disputes, the Gemara records, complicated sugya. The Gemara says both with regard to classic standard chametz that's been mixed into non-chametz. You have a soup that has a little bit of grain in it, or you have or chametz nuksha. Nuksha is either chametz which is quasi chametz, it's not totally chametz, or it's something which is not so edible. So it's so that's considered chametz nuksha. So either of these things. So our Mishnah, the Gemara says, seems to hold either of these things. There's bal yera and midaraisa. Midaraisa, one violates a lav for having these things in your house on Pesach. Either taruvas or chametz nuksha still violate the lav of bal yera. The Gemara brings opinions both ways. That nuksha is a lav and kolshkein taruvas, or taruvas is a lav and kolshkein nuksha. Some Amoram hold, other Amoram are machalik. They say nuksha is and taruvas is not. Taruvas is and nuksha is not. How do we paskin? Again, we don't really paskin Chiyuv Malchus, but the Shulchan Aruch does paskin Chiyuv Malchus here. He does paskin the lav. He says taruvas chametz, it violates the lav of bal yera and bal yimatza. Bal yimatza, he gives various examples. However, if it is davar sheyesh bo taruvas chametz ve'eina roi lachila, if it's not edible, then you can keep it around and there's no bal yera. The Mishnah Berurah explains that you can't keep any chametz in your house on Pesach, whether it is batal midaraisa or not. But that if it's not batal midaraisa, if it's min b'she'eino mino and it's less than 60, that would be an isser daraisa of bal yera, and you have to destroy it, and you're over bal yera, and if you don't destroy it, it becomes chametz shavar of a Pesach. When it comes to, but when it's less than that, when it's less than 1 in 60, it's 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, then he says that that would not be bal yera midaraisa, or when it's min b'mino, we paskin min b'mino is batal midaraisa barov, even though it's asa midrabanan. So as long as the isser is midrabanan, you're not over bal yera midaraisa. Midaraisa you can keep it around. Midrabanan you can't keep it around. They're afraid you'll eat it. So anything that you can't eat on Pesach, the taruvas chametz or chametz nuksha that you can't keep around. If there's an isser daraisa in such chametz is considered chametz daraisa but taruvas, then you're over bal yera. Midaraisa you can't keep it around. If you can't eat it midrabanan, then if midaraisa it's batal, then midrabanan you can't keep it around. And the nafkamina is that after Pesach, midrabanan it doesn't become asur. It's asur to keep it on Pesach. But if the isur was only midrabanan on Pesach, it doesn't become chametz shavar of a Pesach after Pesach. The Mishnah Berurah adds that if you're talking about something that these isurim only apply if the thing actually has chametz in it. If you have a food that has some percentage of chametz in it, whether it's less than 60 or more than 60, either way, at least midrabanan you can't keep it around. Or even if something was cooked together with chametz, you cooked a chicken together with a piece of bread, and then you took out the bread, but since the chicken was cooked with the bread, that chicken can't be kept in your house on Pesach. However, if it was just cooked in a chametz pot, if it was that, he says, even if it wasn't shishim and it was makabel, the tam chametz, he says, it doesn't matter. You're allowed to keep that food around on Pesach, but you should put it away where you're not going to come to eat it. You're not going to come to eat it on Pesach. Chametz nuksha, the Mishnah Berurah explains, we paskin eina over el mishum bal yera bal yimatza. Chametz nuksha is always only an isser midrabanan. The midrabanan you're not allowed to keep it around. And chametz nuksha is either it's not totally chametz or it's something that's not totally edible. So those things you still can't keep it around, but that's only midrabanan. And again, you can't keep it around, but that isser is only midrabanan. There is one, so really you can't keep around any chametz on Pesach, even if it's only a taruvas, even if it's batal midaraisa, even if it's chametz nuksha. At least midrabanan, you're not allowed to keep any form of chametz around on Pesach. Now we've discussed previously, once chametz is nifsel me'achilas kelev, it's not suitable even for a dog. That's not chametz anymore. You can keep that around. And furthermore, if the chametz is betaruvas, then even if it is suitable for a dog, if it's not suitable for a human being, if it's nifsel me'achilas adam and it's betaruvas, so you're not allowed to eat that chametz on Pesach, but that you are allowed to keep around on Pesach, and that is a major kula. That if you have chametz that's nifsel me'achilas adam, even if it's still suitable for a dog, it's not totally inedible yet, and it's betaruvas, that is mutter. Post can discuss things like pet foods. Are you allowed to keep around a pet food on Pesach that has some chametz in it? So pet foods that are completely inedible for a human being, that are something foul, and some kind of fish foods are really, really inedible for humans, and they only have a mixture of chametz in them, and that's fine. That's teruvat's chametz, which is not suitable for human consumption, and that's fine. But there is debate about things like dog food and cat food, which aren't tasty. You wouldn't choose to. A human being wouldn't choose to eat dog food or cat food. But the consensus, the minhag is that such food is considered still within the realm of roy la'achila, and roy la'achilas adam, even if it's not a person's ideal food, and therefore you would not be allowed to keep such food around. Would not be allowed to keep such food around on Pesach, and you're not allowed to have hanar from such chametz. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach talks about medicines. He says even if they're somewhat bitter, they may not be considered nifsal me'achilas adam, and therefore even b'taruvis they are still aser. Rabbi Chaim Jachter relates that the Rosh Soloveitchik said toothpaste is not even roy l'achilas kelef. Rabbi Yehuda Amital said that in the Russian labor camps in World War II, people would be so desperate for food that was somewhat edible, somewhat palatable, they would put toothpaste on their bread to give it some taste. So it's hard to know sometimes what is considered achilas adam, achilas kelev. Rabbi Jachter explains that Rav Soloveitchik apparently understood that we don't look at such extreme cases. We don't look at pre-modern standards. We look at modern standards. Modern standards are this is considered not suitable for humans or for dogs. So in much of the Orthodox community, he says people use regular toothpaste on Pesach. Even if it would have a chametz ingredient, it would be considered nifsal me'achilas adam or achilas kelev. The Rabbi Jachter wants to argue that pet foods might be considered nifsal achilas adam as well. He wants to argue that we could argue that dog food and cat food, people don't really eat it. It's not considered suitable. It's suitable for dogs, certainly, but not for humans. And therefore, as long as it's taruvas chametz and it's not suitable for humans, there is some basis for leniency. Rabbi Jachter says the minhag is that we're machmer, that we don't serve animals such food on Pesach, but there is some basis for leniency as long as it's less than 50%, and it's nifs, and you can argue it's nifs me'achilas adam. There is some basis for leniency, even though it's a chiddush, he says, and it's controversial. It's not the accepted practice. But again, it all depends on this somewhat hard to define standard of nifsal me'achilas adam. On Daf Mem Daled, the Gemara has an extended sugya about various key principles in the laws of kashrus, of yardeya, of teruvas, of kizayis b'fnechilas pras, and of heter mitzaref le'isser. One of the important principles the Gemara discusses is tam ke'ikar. That if you have a teruvas, a mixture of foods, and one of the food is a minority, but it gives tam, its taste is noticeable in the overall mixture. Tam ke'ikar, the tam is as if that thing is the ikar, and therefore that's awesome. The Gemara brings psukim. The Gemara says we darshan it. First, the Brayso says we darshan that from mishras. The word mishras, about in the context of nazir, tells you the chiddush of tam ke'ikar. Rabbi Kiva has a different source. He learns it from Basar B'chalav. The Gemara certainly kipshuto seems to indicate that tam ke'ikar, the idea that when something gives tam, it's not batel, that is a din daraisa. Even though normally we have the concept of bittel, that a miyut of food is batel, not when it's nosin tam. When it's nosin tam, we say tam ke'ikar and it's not batel. It's actually a machlokes rishonim whether we paskin tam ke'ikar is midaraisa or not. Rashi says that at least according to some opinions, and that's how we paskin according to Rashi, tam ke'ikar when it comes to chulin as opposed to kachim is not daraisa, and our Gemara of drashas of psukim is asmachta, but really the ikar is tam ke'ikar is lav daraisa. Other poskim, Tosfos, Rebbeinu Tam, they say that tam ke'ikar is midaraisa. We paskin in Shulchan Aruch, tam ke'ikar is midaraisa. What's the ramification of tam ke'ikar daraisa? Either way, tam is certainly aser. It's certainly aser if it's a mixture. What does it matter whether it's daraisa or drabanan? So the Shulchan Aruch has one nafkamina, a relatively common nafkamina. Let's say you have a little bit of iser that falls into a pot of heter, or a little bit of meat that falls into a pot of milk. So we know the basic rule: if it's less than 1 in 60, it's batil and it's mutter. Less than 1 in 60 is not nosin tam. More than 1 in 60 is nosin tam and it's aser. What if you don't know how much fell in? You couldn't measure exactly how much fell in. It fell in already. You don't know how much it was. So the rabbi asks you how much fell in, and you don't know. You say, I'm not sure how much fell in. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, like Rebbeinu Tam, the tam ke'ikar is midaraisa, and therefore, if the amount that fell in may have actually been nosin tam, you're not sure, it was min b'she'eino mino, and it might have been less than 1 in 60, that's a suffix daraisa, he says, because tam ke'ikar is daraisa. So if you're not sure how much fell in, and it's possible that the amount that fell in is actually nosing tam, that's a suffix tam ke'ikr, so that's a suffix deraisa. But if you know for sure that it was batel, if you know for sure that midaraisa it's batel, so for example, if it was min b'mino, and min b'mino is always batel barov, it's midrabanan it's asur until you have 60. But we pass min b'mino is always batel, and midrabanan you need 60. So if you know you had rov and you're not sure you had 60, that's only midrabanan. It's because that's not tam ke'ikr. Min b'mino is not tam ke'ikr. Tam ke'ikr is min b'shein amino. Min b'mino we paskin is always batel midaraisa barov, so that's a suffix drabanan. So if you don't know how much fell in, so if tam ke'ikr is deraisa in a situation where tam ke'ikr applies a suffix shishim, a suffix tam is aser, and if it's just a suffix in a din drabanan, then it would, if you don't know how much fell in, then it would be mutter. Another very interesting ramification of the question of tam ke'ikr deraisa comes up. The halacha is that if a person is a cholish yesh bo sakana, he's a person in danger of his life, we can be machal Shabbos, we can feed him treif, give him whatever he needs. So what happens if we have a choice? We have no kosher food for him. He needs meat. We have no kosher meat around, and it's Shabbos. We can either shecht an animal for him and prepare it for him, or we can just give him treif meat, which doesn't need to be shechted. So which is better? So the halacha is we shecht. It's better to shecht. Either way, it's nisa daraisa, nevela is daraisa, Shabbos is daraisa. Better to shecht. We shouldn't give different reasons for why, but it's better to shecht. Some achronim argue that's only when both are daraisa. Nevela is daraisa, Shabbos is daraisa. But what if the nevela is only midrabanan? Why would it be drabanan? Well, if you say tam ke'ikr is not daraisa, let's say he has to eat beef broth. He's going to eat a soup made out of beef. He's not going to eat the beef itself. That's a question of tam ke'ikr. So if tam ke'ikr is drabanan, that's not daraisa at all. Then certainly the some achronim argue it's better to give him the treif beef broth, which is only drabanan, because tam ke'ikr is only drabanan, according to some rishonim, than to shecht. And even though we paskin tam ke'ikr is daraisa, it's not clear if we paskin that way b'toras vadai or b'toras safek. So some achronim argue that it's at least a suffix, so it's better to give him the suffix, whether it's deraisa at all, the treif meat, the treif beef broth, which might not even be deraisa, because tam ke'ikr might not be deraisa, than to shecht, which is vade deraisa. The Afike Yam says he spoke to Rav Simcha Zelig Rieger, the Dayan of Brisk, about this question, and he asked, and he says he once had the story with Rav Chaim. They once had a cholish yesh b'sakana who had to eat some beef broth. So Rav Chaim said, shecht the animal. Afterwards, Rav Simcha Zelig said, we can make this argument that beef broth, since tam ke'ikr might not be deraisa, might only be drabanan, so maybe that would have been a better thing to do. Rav Chaim said, had you made this argument to me, had you pointed this out to me, I would have done that. So that's a shail on Dachron. On Daf Mem Hey, the Gemara talks about various cases where you have different pieces of chametz that are in the same areva, the same big trough, or the same house, different parts of the house. So when it comes to the areva, the big bowl, the big utensil, so the Mishnah says, if it's kizayis from makam echad, then you have to be mavar, you have to destroy it, part of your chiyuv dir. And if not, we say it's batal b'miyuto. The Gemara brings a couple of different interpretations of the Mishnah. We paskin like the second one, that which we say that if there's no kizayis in a single place, it's batal b'miyuto, it depends. That's only when it's asui l'chazik, when it's there, when it's like plugs in the holes in the areva to strengthen it. Then if it's not a kizayis malcham echad, it's batal. When it's not l'chazik, it's just residue that was left over, then you're chayav levair. You have to destroy it even if there is less than a kizayis in each place, then it is still aser. That's how we pass in the Shulchan Aruch, that if kizayis makam echad, you always have to do beer. If it's not a kizayis makam echad, it depends whether it's l'chazek, to stuff up a hole or a crack, then it's batel, and if not, you're chayav levar. That which we say, that if it's less, that if you don't have a kizayis in any one place, but it's not there to stuff up a crack, then you're chayav levar. There's a major machlokes poskim as to Rishonim and Achronim, whether that is only, Rishonim brought by the Achronim, whether that is only if there's a total of a kizayis overall, then we say the kli is mitzaref them and chayav levar, but if there's only a single half a kizayis, even if it's not plugging any holes, you can just say forget about it, or if there's a bunch of crumbs, but in toto they're less than a kizayis, some poskim say that's fine, you don't have to worry about it. Other poskim say even less than a kizayis, if it's not there to plug up a hole, so it's not batel, even less than a kizayis by itself, you're chayav to mavar. We have a similar machlokas based on a Gemara later on this Amud, later on this Daf. The Gemara says, Shmuel said, or Nachman Shmuel said, 2 half zayises in two different places in the house. Certainly, if they're in the same areva, if they're in the same house, you're chayav levar. In the areva, you're not. We already said in the areva, if they're plugging up the hole, you're certainly not chayav to mavar. In a house, the Gemara said chayav levar. Why? Because sometimes you sweep them up and they might be brought together. The Gemara said, what about one's in different rooms, one's in the bayis, one's in the aliyah, one's in the bayis, one's in the achsadra, two different houses, one behind another, that's teku. So the Gemara says two halves of a zayis in different parts of the house. In a case where it's plausible that they'll come together, you're chayav levar. In a place where they're in different houses, it's a suffix, and that the Gemara says is teku. So when the Shulchan Aruch brings this din, when the Rambam brings this din, that he says that we're in the bias, that the bias you have to be mevar, but if they're in two different rooms, two different parts of the house, they're never going to come together. Each one has half a zayis, then you don't have to be mevar. So the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch say that's when they're stuck to the walls. And some poskim understand, the Rosh and the Ramach and the Kesef Mishnah understand that similar to the trough, that's only when they're stuck to the walls. But if they're not stuck to the walls, then even less than a kizayis. Even less than a kizayis is a problem. Others say no, stuck to the walls is lav dafka. Once they're less than a zayis, there's no chiyuv to mevar them. This is a major machlokes rishonim and a debate in the achronim whether there's a chiyuv beer on less than a zayis. If there's a chance it'll come together, two chatzi zaysim in a house, when you sweep them in the same room, they can come together. You certainly have to mevar. If there are two half zaysim inside a kli, we say kli mitzarfam. Certainly have to mevar, but there's only one half of a zayis or two halves of a zayis in a way that there's no tziruf between them. That's a machlokas whether there's a chiyuv beer on half a zayis. The Acharonim debate this, and there's no absolutely clear hachra. Post can bring the minhag is if we know there's chametz there, Yisrael kedoshim heim, we certainly try to be mevar anyway. The Chach Yaakov says he brings some of these shitas and he says that he's not going to spend. It's not worth spending that much time on. He says ein laharach b'dinim elu. Because Yisrael kedoshim heim, and they get rid of all the chametz, even chametz stuck to the walls. So in practice, we try to get rid of everything. But there are actually major ramifications to this halacha, to this machlokus of whether there's a chiyuv beer on less than a kizayis. Let's say something is really hard or really stuck and really hard to get out. You have to worry about it. One application they talk about is svarim, books. The Chazon Ish was famously stringent that he would actually, not only would he get rid of chametz in books, he would actually do a bedika in case maybe there was chametz, even though certainly there was less than a kizayis in the book. He held that the chiyuv beer applies even less than a kizayis, and is even a chiyuv bedika for that. Most people don't do that. Most people don't have this chumrah of doing bedika for pieces of less than a kizayis, crumbs inside their benchers, inside their svarim. Most people don't do that. So again, if there is an obvious piece of chametz there, but it's less than a kizayis, then certainly it's easy to get rid of. Everyone's going to say Yisrael kedoshim heim. Of course, you should get rid of it. But in a case where it's difficult or would require a great deal of tedium or effort, that's when we have this machlokas, how strict do you have to be? With regard to svarim, the Chazon Ish was stringent about this. One additional basis for leniency is that some of the poskim say the reason you have to get rid of a piece of less than a kizayis is because you might come to eat it on Pesach. The Magen Avram says that he brings from Rishonim, it's only if it's more or less edible, but if it's metunaf ktsas upakas mikizayis, it doesn't need beer. If it's a little bit dirty, if it's a little bit unsavory, you don't have to worry about it. We're not talking about nifsal mechilas adam, nifsal mechilas kelev. Of course, that's not a problem. But we're talking about mechilas kelev. Certainly, we're talking about it's not so desirable for people. So you're not going to come to eat it. Some of the achronim are masber, so you don't have to worry about it. But some want to argue that the crumbs in the bencher, no one's going to come to start eating crumbs out of their bencher. So it falls into this category of metunaf ktsas. Nevertheless, the Chazon Ish didn't hold this way. Apparently, the Chazon Ish held that a person should get rid of crumbs and svarim and should even do bedika for them. Should even do bedika for the should even do bedika for the crumbs in the should even do bedika for the crumbs in the svarim. Again, other poskim say that you don't have to worry about this. That you still shouldn't put it on the table they bring. You still shouldn't put svarim. Actually, you still shouldn't put svarim on the table that you're eating, where crumbs from the chametz can fall into the food. But the Chazon Ish was very strict. The Chazon Ish said that you have to be bodek. He said, and if you have a sefer that if you have a sefer that you were in bodek, you would have to sell. You would have to. You have to cover them up or put them mechitza, so you shouldn't come to use them. Maybe I don't know if you have to sell them, but at least you have to make a hecker that you won't come to eat them or do anything with them. The Chazon Ish was so concerned about this possibility of coming to eat them that he would either clean all the ones he wanted to use on Pesach, and the ones he wasn't going to clean, he would put a mechitza and segregate in a way that there was no chance of coming to eat them on Pesach, eat any of the chametz in the svarim on Pesach. On Daf Mem Vav, the Gemara talks about, this is not a Pesach specific sugya, a Yom Tov sugya. The Gemara says if someone bakes or cooks on Yom Tov for chol, so Rav Chisda says that's an Isur Daraisa, even though you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, it's only for Yom Tov itself, not for chol. Rabbah says Ein Aloka. So Rav Chisda says you get Malchus, he doesn't hold to the svar of Hol Miklu Archim. The reason Rabbah says there's no Malchus, even though Rabbah agrees you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Chol, but Rabbah says maybe guests will come. Even if you don't need it, even if you already ate today, you still can cook on Yom Tov afternoon. Maybe guests will come. So because of this svar of Hoel, that's not the Isur Daraisa of some Drabanan, but it's not the Isur Daraisa. There's no Malchus of cooking. And the Gemara says Rav Chisda does not hold to the svar of Hoel. Rabbah asked Rav Chisda, if you don't hold to the svar of Hoel, what's Pshat in Erev Tavshilin? Erev Tavshilin means you cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. How can you cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos? If you don't hold to the svar of Hoel, it's an Isur Daraisa. How can Chazal make it the kind of Erev Tavshilin? If you can't cook on Yom Tov for Chol, you can't cook on Yom Tov for Matzah Yom Tov even if it's Shabbos. How can Erev Tavshilin work? It's an Isur Daraisa according to you. According to me, the svar is Hoel. Really, it's mutter to cook on Yom Tov for the next day. Midaraisa, it's mutter because maybe guests will come. Drabanan, it's Asur. The Drabanan waive their own Isur if you make an Erev Tavshilin. But according to you, that the Isser of Hoel, that the Isser of cooking is Midaraisa, how does Erev Tavshilin work? So the Gemara says that no, I hold Midaraisa Tzarchei Shabbos Nasim B'Yom Tov. I hold that you are allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Midaraisa, you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Chol, but you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos, and that's only Xera, and that's where Erev Tavshilin works. How do we paskin? So most Rishonim paskin like Rabbah. Most Rishonim paskin that it's Asur Midaraisa to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos, and the only heter is Hoel. The only heter is maybe guests will come, and even if guests will come, it's still an Isur Midrabanan, and that's where Erev Tavshilin works. And most Rishonim say that Erev Tavshilin depends on Hoel. And Tosha says if Erev Tavshilin depends on Hoel, according to Shitas Rabbah, Tosha says if you cook in the evening, close to the end of the day, there's no more time for Archip to come. The food is not ready till nightfall. There's no Hoel. And then according to Rabbah, you would get Malchus, and according to Rabbah, Erev Tavshilin wouldn't work. According to Rav Chisda, there's a special heter to cook from Yom Tov for Shabbos Midaraisa. You don't need Hoel. Hoel is not, he doesn't hold of Hoel. So according to Rav Chisda, it doesn't matter when you want to cook on Yom Tov. But according to Rabbah, that most Rishonim paskin like, it would be Asur to cook on Yom Tov close to the evening, if there's no time for guests to come, because the heter of Erev Tavshilin is based on Hoel. Hoel doesn't apply if the food is not ready till late in the day. Some Achronim tell us, though, that the Worm and Hagim, the Rishonim don't stipulate, many Rishonim don't stipulate this, the Gemara never stipulates this. It seems odd, the Gemara wouldn't tell you that Erev Tavshilin only allows you to cook earlier in the day, not late in the day. Some of the Achronim tell us the minhag was to be lenient, the minhag was to cook on Yom Tov, on Erev Shabbos, until nightfall, until Shkia. So Achronim look for different heterim to do this. The Mishnah says you really shouldn't. Since we rely on Hoel, even if you have an Erev Tavshilin, you shouldn't cook too close to the evening. You should make sure you cook early enough in the day that guests can still come. The Bir Halacha is Ma'arach on this and says that there are many Rishonim who are lenient. Many Rishonim paskin Erev Tavshilin doesn't require Hoel, and the Bir Halacha actually comes out that there is some basis for leniency. He says certainly if it's a Shas Adchak, he says if it's a case of great need, then there is. Then there is some basis for leniency. He says certainly on the second day of Yom Tov, we're cooking where it's only Drabanan, maybe even the first day of Yom Tov, there's basis to be somech on the Rishonim who are lenient. But Pashtus, you shouldn't do that. Pashtus, you shouldn't cook. You shouldn't cook on Yom Tov too close to the evening. So he says that there are different svaras. In the Pnei Halacha, he brings that most of our food is at least somewhat ready. He says it's the Kamat Tamid. The food is somewhat ready on Yom Tov. He says we don't really cook the last minute of the day. Even if you cook late in the day, you don't have enough time to have a leisurely meal before the evening. You'll have some time to basically eat it. He says he brings an eitzah which he likes. Very much from the Arletzion. He says that put something that cooks quickly into the food. Your main dish, your chicken takes 2 hours to cook. Toss an egg into the chicken pan. The egg will be ready much faster. Even though the chicken won't, that's Ribu B'Shiurin. Ribu B'Shiurin is mutter on Yom Tov. So even if you want to cook an hour before nightfall on Yom Tov, where there won't be time for the chicken to be ready, at least there'll be time for the egg to be ready. and therefore again it'll be mutter because of hol miklu archu. On Daf Mem Zayin, the Gemara talks about muktzah in the context. The Gemara is talking about how many different averos, how many different isurim deraisa you can violate by cooking on Yom Tov, Gid Anasha, and so on, and eating it. You're over all kinds of isurim. So at one point, the Gemara says you can be over, according to Rabbah, who doesn't hold a poel. The Gemara makes an ukimta according to him. According to Rabbah, who holds a poel, the Gemara makes an ukimta that muktzah. You're over if you cook atzei muktzah, wood that was muktzah on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, that would be another Isser Daraisa. So is muktzah Daraisa, the Gemara asks? So he says, yeah, muktzah is Daraisa, because the pasuk says, that you should prepare before Shabbos. Things have to be muchan, they can't become ready on Shabbos. The muktzah is Daraisa, and that's haris for los asik malacha. Rashi explains that the echinu means things should be ready before Yontif, or Shabbos. You shouldn't have to start doing things on Shabbos. And anything that's not muchan, anything that's muktzah, falls into the category of lo sasech al malacha. So according to this position in the Gemara, if someone uses wood of muktzah to make a fire on Yom Tov, he violates a lav daraisa. Rashi in Be'ah learns this is lahalacha. Rashi in Be'ah learns that Rabbah over there, who has a problem of muktzah, of Be'ah shenolda b'Shabbos or Yom Tov, is a din daraisa. Rashi says Rabbah l'tameh. Rabbah holds muktzah is daraisa, and our Gemara, Rabbah says muktzah is daraisa. Tosfos and other Rishonim disagree with Rashi. Tosfos says that Rashi says muktzah is daraisa according to Rabbah. Tosfos says no, that's not correct, and Rabbah himself was chosher. The Gemara had questions on Rabbah and our sugya lahalacha. Muktzah is not daraisa. The vast majority of poskim say muktzah is not daraisa. They say it's derabanan, but nevertheless there is the sheet of Rashi. The Achronim struggle to miyashiv Rashi. Some Achronim say, the Chasim Sofer, they say that moving muktzah, the muktzah we're familiar with, moving around muktzah, that's only an isser midrabanan. But eating the muktzah or consuming it, that actually could be an isser midaraisa. The other posting of other chilukim based on muktzah, that if they actually didn't come off the tree till Shabbos or Yom Tov, they came off on Shabbos and Yom Tov, that kind of muktzah, your Mesiach Das, it was still attached to the tree on when Shabbos or Yom Tov began. That's deraisa. Suppose can limit that idea of Rashi in various ways. And in any event, Rashi is something of a das yachid. But this is a notable shita based in our Gemara that muktzah may actually be deraisa. Poskim also note the shita of the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan doesn't discuss Rabbah specifically, our Gemara, but the Aruch HaShulchan says on Shabbos we find many categories of Isurim Drabanan, Amir Lakum, and many categories of Shvus. The Aruch HaShulchan says you should not treat Shvusim as simple Drabanans. He says there are many Shvusim, but he says on Shabbos, Shvusim are basically deraisa. He says there are various psukim, drashas. The Chazal said, he brings in Mechilta, it says you should be Nizar, you should be Shomer Shabbos. That's going beyond Malacha. The Malacha is Malacha, but he says, B'chol asher amarti alachem tishameru. Tishameru means things that are not Malacha. He brings another drasha, the Nevi'im talked about Shvusim, he says. He brings a Ritva, B'Shem the Ramban. We have a Kabbalah that the Shvusim of Shabbos are different from the Shvusim of other Shvusim, which are only Drabanan. They're Ki'i Surei Torah. He says, how would Shabbos be a Yom Hanucha? You do your business all day. The Torah really allowed you to, if you can avoid doing Lamates Malachas, you can do business all day. It can't be. We usually assume that's what the Rabban came along and did. But he says that these are virtually tantamount to Daraisa. The Aruch HaShulchan says, Malacha Mamash is Chiyav Skila. Shvusim, you're not Chayav Skila, but they're Isuran, Isur Gomer, Ke Isur Torah. They're at least virtually Isur Torah. All Malach, so it's all Shvusim, not just Muktzah. Muktzah in particular, we have the sheet of Rashi that it's Daraisa, although Rashi is something of a Das Yachid. Aruch HaShulchan also says that Muktzah specifically, he says, he refers in Hilchos Muktzah to his general rule that all types of Shvusim are ancient, they go back to the Nevi'im, they go back to the Torah itself. Kach Tivul HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us. The Shvusim are not Malachas and they're not Chayav Skila, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chayav Osanu, God himself commanded us to keep all the Shvusim the way we do it today. And Muktzah also, he says, Muktzah is, the Isurim Muktzah existed, Me'adishin in the Torah, from the time of the Torah, even if we don't darshan them from Rabbah's Drasha, but they fall into this general category of ancient Shvusim that go back a long time. So the Aruch HaShulchan is telling us all Shvusim, including Muktzah, should be treated as virtually or tantamount to Daraisa. Muktzah specifically, our Gemara brings a drasha that it's Daraisa. It's not clear that it's a Maskana, and Lahalacha, virtually all poskim agree Muktzah is Drabanan, but the Shitas Rashi does seem to be that at least certain forms of Muktzah, that certain forms of muktzah are asur midaraisa according to Rab.